Hey aspirants, welcome to Insights ICANN initiative. So today we'll basically start with a GS paper 2 concept called Global Hunger Index. So as we know, there was a lot of uproar when Global Hunger Index was released because it had shown a lot of poorer light on the story of India's hunger battle. So we'll just quickly look into what is the idea behind this particular index that was released. So, as you can see in this article, which is talking about India ranking 105th out of the Global Hunger Index out of 127 countries. So, it is considered under a serious category that we need a lot of attention to be put towards it. However, this particular news had brought a lot of doubts with respect to India's social protection measures that is given to people from the vulnerable sections in various formats. So before we go to criticize this particular index, let's quickly look into the methodology that the index uses. So this would be of a lot of relevance for many of your questions. So in this methodology, Global Hunger Index basically relies on four parameters. One is related to undernourishment. This would be part for your prelims basically. Undernourishment, child wasting, it's also related to child stunting and child mortality rate. So these three are specific indexes for children below 5 years of age, whereas undernourishment is a universally applicable data. So here each one of this is getting equal weightage, 25% each, and the higher the score when you're calculating the final index, the more severe the hunger is in the country. So this author in the Deccan Herald's article was talking about the limitations in this methodology altogether, and how it is negatively giving a negative perception about India's long fight to make the country a hunger-free nation. So if you see here, the first limitation is with respect to the perspective of calorie intake. So calorie intake is usually in the global level, it is consumed, perceived that 1800 kilocalories is required for a person's healthy lifestyle. So this particular number, which is a universally fixed benchmark, is contradicted by the author here, who tells that in India, the dietary pattern is varying from various aspects. That is, there are people belonging to different age groups, there are people who do various different occupations in the country, they follow different type of lifestyles in their daily lives, and their health conditions also matter. So if we tell that this 1800 is the benchmark for all of them, it would be a flawed interpretation. So at the same time, of late in India, the recent surveys have also shown that there's a switch from or there is a switch towards more conscious eating among the public, where they have made better dietary preferences over the regular ones. So they are focusing more on quality of the diet rather than the quantity of the diet. So here the author tells that India, being a country that is having a huge diversity in the diets, it is improving to see that the fruits, vegetables, and the milk consumption is the country is increasing, and this diversity is worth appreciable. But now, even if we keep telling that calorie intake should be the parameter from which I'm going to judge whether a nation is hungry or not, that would not give us the right kind of reality that is surfacing in the ground level. So the second one here is with respect to the concept of child stunting, child wasting, and child mortality rate. So why it is disputed is here, when we talk about child stunting, wasting, and mortality, this is not because the children in India are hungry, or there is no food available to them. So these reasons in India is definitely a pressing concern, but there are multiple factors at play here. What are the multiple factors? If we consider, it is about sanitation, that is cleanliness or pure drinking water for people, health care access, that is if a child is unwell, how quickly they get access to health care. It also has a lot to do with maternal health for the children's mothers. So if we are focusing just on the idea that the children are not getting proper food, hence they are stunted, wasted, or even child mortality is high, it would be a different notion altogether. So when this data is also very sensitive to local region, right? In some areas it is prominent because of the cultural significance or cultural backwardness. At the same time, there are many local areas where this phenomena has already been tackled successfully by the government using midday meal schemes and other services. So when we cannot, the idea here is that a blanket imposition of the idea that throughout the country we have this parameter by ignoring the realities many ground level is something which makes this whole statistics in a flawed manner. The third and the very important aspect here is equal weightage given to the all the four parameters, whereas three out of the four is completely belonging to the children, but we are here totally talking about the universal population and the universal population's hunger problem. So here the devil is in the data itself. That is, this whole survey of global hunger index relies on secondary data. That is, some institutes and surveys would have already collected the data. This entity just collates them and tries to draw conclusions out of this. So this itself is talking about the authenticity with which the data have been collected by the primary sources. At the same time, the article also talks about a typical Asian person requiring 1500 kilocalories for their daily requirement compared to the global average of 1800. So this in itself is telling that how a universal phenomena like hunger but cannot be applied in a diverse society like India, where the challenges vary for group of people from one group to another. So if you recall, we have had many successful programs in the form of midday meal scheme. We have National Food Security Act, public distribution system, integrated child development scheme, where Anganwadi Kendras are used for giving nutritional food to the children. So despite all this, if the index is telling in a negative manner, there is definitely a critical viewpoint which we need to look into this report. So do quote these limitations when you talk about how numbers or data can be mismanaged or misinterpreted in the modern democratic worlds. So if you know, in the present world, statistics and numbers play a major role in defining the perception of the people with respect to efforts of the government. That is, hence, the numbers with respect to GDP, unemployment play a major role during election as well, including inflation. So, at a time when governments successively have put efforts to reduce the hunger story of India, these kind of international reports throw a very negative light on all the positive people and the institutions that have worked towards the eradication of hunger. So with this, we'll move towards the next topic, which is related to artificial intelligence. So as we have seen from the past 2 years, AI technology has been an important development in our GS paper 3, science and technology aspect. But the questions with respect to AI, it not necessarily come in paper 3 alone. We have already seen its application in paper 4 through various connotations. 2024 mains had a question directly from ethical perspective of AI, and in the coming years we can definitely expect a question from GS paper 2 governance aspect, by telling what needs to be done by the world governments to regulate a booming section called AI, without which the world would be in a difficult position. So if you see, kindly read all the articles from that are coming in Hindu and other newspapers related to AI. That would help you to broaden your knowledge on what could be the threats and advantages that AI would give us, right? So here, this article in New Indian Express was started with a person who actually gave birth to the concept of AI, called Alan Turing. So if you read this, a computer would deserve to be called intelligent if it could deceive a human into believing it was human. That is, if a machine is able to fool around a person that it's a human sitting on the other side and giving information, then that is a very possible explanation for artificial intelligence. So intelligent programs have been developed over a period of time that has almost altered the way we study, way we research, how we practice our professions, etc. So where it can be misused is a major notion here. It has majorly impacted the work lives of the people. Society has been altered. Even democratic credentials are impacted. So if you see, the three exacerbations of AI was discussed in this article called exacerbation of biases. So this is a societal impact. Here the author tells that data that is fed into machine learning, it is critical, and this particular data contribute a lot to the way AI tools have given perception to the user. That is, let's say there is some security data or security data set that police department is using, and this creator of the data set has been biased throughout the life. So police could be amplifying these biases when they use the data set to crack a particular case. So this data set usually disregards any kind of historical context for which biases were there, or some social injustice. All of them will be ignored, and the biases that we have as humans, we feed it into data systems as well. So it exacerbates already existing biases. The second aspect that we can talk about is exacerbating inequalities. So how inequalities are broadened due to AI? Usually AI is coming with the threat of job losses, whereas this job loss is mainly seen or is mainly experienced by disadvantaged sections of society. So when government is talking about AI being used in many areas, job losses is going to be an important segment, especially who would suffer, those from socially and economically disadvantaged sections. So the third one is it would exacerbate anonymity. Anonymity is about the fake news, or let's say deep fakes, that is created due to AI. So the person who creates this is anonymous, but the impact of these deep fakes are profound on our society and our political landscape. So where India needs to work on, or what are the areas on which we need to focus on, is very relevant, because this article was written by an MP who represents Tamil Nadu state. Okay, so these suggestions were quite effective. So first one is about, we talk about AI skilled youth. So it is about giving AI training to students so that they can garner a lot of employment opportunities. But here the author tells that we need to gather a lot of information on vulnerability of various job profiles that are bound to be impacted by AI. So when we do this, we'll get to know which kind of tools or which kind of AI is needed to train which set of people. So when, unless and until we plan on this, umbrella legislation or an umbrella idea to train students with AI might not be effective. So the second one is copyright infringement. India government has been silent with respect to copyright violations done by many AI chatbots, which actually discourages innovation. So the government needs to make this a very strict aspect when they are trying to regulate AI. So this aspect needs a lot of attention. The third one is data bias that goes into making of AI tools we just discussed. So how to come out of it to make sure there's a lot of transparency when data sets are being generated. So when we have transparency, we will get to include a lot of diversity built in this AI chatbots or AI tools, so that Indians or any other part of the world, they get equally represented without biasness in the innovation system. So the fourth one here could be innovation needs to be teamed up with data protection. It needs to be done along with risk assessment. So all the three combination needs to be roped in when India talks about data regulation or AI regulation. The fifth but very important one is multilateralism. That is, as we know, artificial intelligence knows no boundaries. The regulation efforts should be coordinated by all the important countries of the world, so that we get to know how every other country is faring in this idea of data imperative. So coming to the next topic is about a concept called apocalypse. So apocalypse is an important term that is used in a philosophical manner, which is about a catastrophe. Catastrophe is such kind of an event which kind of signifies the end of the world, or let's say end of an era and beginning of something new. So this is the term that is called as apocalypse. So many people would term Second World War to be an apocalypse, where it would give birth to a new world order. So in a similar manner, this article in today's New Indian Express spoke about apocalypse, that is this catastrophic event that would destroy the world and give birth to new order. Is it happening now, or is it a perspective that we can wait for in the future? So why this topic had come up? It was with respect to the ongoing warfare in the world, in Russia, Ukraine, and Israel Hamas war, and the Middle East tensions. So in this article, basically the author discussed about four major threats with respect to the warfare. But this is definitely not from a humanitarian idea alone. This is also from the economic idea. So if we see, there was a recent missile in the last week of November where Russia used, that is, it's called as intermediate range ballistic missile, which had led to significant destruction in Ukraine. Okay, this is not nuclear powered, but has put a huge devastating impact on Ukraine altogether. The second idea is about Dragon drones. So Dragon drones is where used by Ukrainian army recently, where we can talk about molten metal. So this liquid metal is sprayed using drones into the lands of the people, where people's skin will burn in such a way that it's beyond recovery. The third concept is about thermobaric bombs, which was mainly used by Israel against Gaza civilians and Hamas. So it is about using low intensity devices, low intensity weapons, creating a bombardment at the ground level, and a smoky layer will be created. Then they will use some other important device that would burn this entire smoke, thus rising the surface temperature, which would be killing a large scale of people. This is also getting competed with AI driven drones that China has been mastering of late, and US are creating drones where it can go and target the right people in the ground. So this is nothing but it is sending a message to us that peace is a concept which is just being discussed at the international stadiums, but at the ground level, it is all these drone and other defense industry that is actually ruling the roost. So all these countries that are major suppliers and exporters of weapon are also the ones who are using it for their own purpose, and it is leading to a lot of catastrophe at the ground level. So basically, the author here tells that Ukraine and Gaza, they have become testing grounds of all these technologies. So there's a very beautiful phrase she has used, which would be very relevant to our answers. It is about intelligence of the countries, military, and industrial complex. Correct? And industrial complex, all three of them have been mixed to make sure this war just goes on in perpetuity. So why this topic is relevant is that the author talks about a future where people would perceive that in future there would come a technology where we are going to bombard the humanity. So humans were fearing the nuclear warfare, giving birth to so many conventions to restrict usage of nuclear weapons. And despite all this effort, that future of which people were worrying about is no more future, but it has become the present. So how the war has changed this idea of apocalypse is worth observing here. So if you remember, this year's UPSC paper 4 had a question like, it's not enough to talk about peace, one must believe in it, and it is not enough to believe, one must act upon it. So in this question as well, they have focused on major weapon industries of developed nations adversely influencing the continuation of number of wars for self-interest all around the world. So in this, what are the ethical considerations of the powerful nations in the today's international arena, and to stop the continuation of ongoing conflicts? To try to analyze this question based on the apocalypse discussion we just did, let us know in the comment section what are the ethical consideration of going for such a warfare, so that it's impacting the whole of humanity. So the next topic for today is brain rot. So brain rot is basically a term that has been declared as the word of the year by 2024. If you recall, we had just discussed a similar term related to manifest in one of our previous videos. So the question is not just for the UPSC or just for the exam purpose, it's also for every one of us probably who have become a victim of this particular word. Okay, so this was an analysis that had come up in Indian Express about how brain rot can hit you, or experts are telling how to reverse it. Okay, so if you see the definition here, it is about a gradual decline in thinking or cognitive capacity of a person due to mindless scrolling or doom scrolling that we call or talk about it. So how this is helping us, or where this becomes applicable is, many of the scientists have pointed out that this idea of doomless scrolling, or never ending scrolling that we do, it mainly impacts the brain's cortex. So cortex is the area which actually talks about many voluntary activities like memory, thinking, learning, reasoning. It also talks about problem solving, tells us what is the meaning of consciousness. It defines a human being's emotions, intelligence, and also defines one's personality. So due to this cortex which gets actively involved in scrolling the screens for a long time, it becomes hyperactive. So due to this hyperactivity, it leads to many disorders like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, creates a kind of aggression in the children, or would ultimately result in nothing but addiction to the devices. So in the long run, this complicate and impact our sleep cycle as well. So sleep is the only time when the brain cells actually drain the waste products. But when sleep is deprived, this entire activity in the last time leads to neurodegenerative uh, conditions. So when we are consuming these large volumes of information without meaningful engagement, it makes it harder for the brain to retain details or create long-term memory. So in the long run, this is definitely going to impact our own critical thinking, and for everything we'll try to postpone things, and screen will be the most attractive part for our daily life. So where this topic would be relevant is when you talk about GS paper 1. Indian culture is known to be very beautiful, which has created so many facets for us to even now visit and see, from art and architecture in the visual forms like dance forms and other cultures, literature. But in the future, probably the current generation would not be able to create any such visual content, because most of our modern lifestyles, we have prioritized entertainment over intellectual engagement. So what we get by passive scrolling is nothing but entertainment to our own mind, but we won't be able to create any valuable content which can be left for the future generation, which signifies a cultural shift in the perspective of paper 1. At the same time, when we talk about literature, the whole habit of reading books has completely died out because of habit forming notions of screening the cell phones have kept us out of our reading habits. So this definitely has an impact on proper literature development in the world. At the same time, in GS paper 2, when we talk about digital literacy, so government is having a lot of schemes to literate people in the digital spaces. Now they also have to focus on how to create awareness that you don't keep on scrolling the phone, or use it only for the purpose that it is meant for. So GS paper 4 context, if we are trying to use this, it has a very important topic called information overload. So when information overload is happening due to many of the social media platforms, we do not know which information is important, we do not know which information to retain, we do not know which information we should use when we are making decisions. So this plethora of information that is available before us is definitely something that is impacting our rational decision making. So this ideas would also create a lot of issues in our law and order scenario, where people would mindlessly scroll and consume fake news, creating to unrest in the society. So try to apply this with a topic related to Australia's ban on social media for youngsters, that is for teenagers less than 16 years old. So if you are interested to make sure you don't get addicted to screens, you can watch, pause the video and look into these 7 methods that Indian Express newspaper had suggested to stop ourselves from becoming victims of brain rot. So the last article for today would be the personality of the day, Mr. Nelson Mandela, whose death anniversary is being observed across the world on 5th of December. So I think this person, Nelson Mandela, has had a major ethical impact on the lives of leaders across the world. So here, I would like to tell a small story about the life of Mr. Nelson Mandela, which would be a very good introduction, which will have a major role in giving a proper introduction to your essays and as well as in many ethical answers. So Nelson Mandela, in his 27 years in the jail, came across many life-changing experiences during this time. So one of the time was the time when he comes to encounter Christo Brand. Christo Brand is a 19-year-old jailer who is also a product of apartheid. That is, a person who was inspired by the concept of apartheid and told that white race is superior to the African race. So he used to treat Nelson Mandela with the same disgrace and would consider him as a criminal. But as the Nelson Mandela's humbleness is seen, he has always shown a similar gentle attitude towards Christo Brand in this case. So he has never tried to lecture Christo Brand or never tried to get angry or hate Christo Brand for representing the government which enforces apartheid. So basically, Nelson Mandela would be himself when he performed his daily activities. Such power was there in the lifestyle of Nelson Mandela that very slowly, even without his knowledge, Christo Brand sees himself to be drawn to the personality of Nelson Mandela. So very slowly they start to know each other, they keep interacting with each other, and there comes a time when Nelson Mandela is released out of the jail, but the bond between Christo Brand and Nelson Mandela becomes a lifelong friendship even after this. So this image you can see here is of Christo Brand meeting Nelson Mandela once he becomes the president of South Africa. So this attitude of Nelson Mandela tells that if you are a person of ethics, you would definitely believe in the idea of dignity for all. That is, whether a person is belonging to the opposite creed or what you believe in, dignity is something that every human needs to be given just because they are human beings. So many ethical principles universally apply for this concept of dignity, and this is something which can aptly fit in our GS paper 4 answers. So the second concept which we can learn from Nelson Mandela is forgiveness. That is, despite being imprisoned for supporting the or opposing the idea of apartheid, and the person called the jailer who represented the government. So the hatred or the the hatred, or we can say the idea of opposition to apartheid, didn't make him hate the person who represented the government. So he forgave the person and told that it's just everybody makes mistakes in their life and you could grow through your mistakes itself. So this forgiveness has a great role in shaping the lifestyle of Mandela throughout. And the C, or the most important aspect for us UPSC aspirants, is his life is a very great example for transformative power of leadership. So many a times people see that who becomes or who decorates the particular position becomes important rather than the position itself. That is, who becomes the president of South Africa in the first place was important rather than who will work, or rather than the position of president himself. So here, what is the meaning of the statement is nothing but many a times it is the personality of the individual which has a transforming role rather than the position itself. So through as a leader, he had a great aura and had a great charisma where he could attract people by his beautiful way of ethical life that he has always proposed and always practiced. So here, there is a very good quote from the life of Nelson Mandela, which we can expand for 10 marks in our GS paper 4. So that is, I never lose, I either win or learn. So Nelson Mandela's life is a testament to forgiveness, resilience, and moral courage. So he chose reconciliation over revenge throughout his life, treating even jailers with respect. So his ethics reminds us that true leadership is about building bridges and it's not about building walls. So this statement would be very relevant at a time when you talk about diplomatic ties between India and her neighbors, or bilateral ties of India. So any issues we have with other countries, it's always better to reconcile and build bridges rather than build wall, which probably complicates the situation even more. So try to use these ideas from Nelson Mandela's lifestyle in your answers. So the last part, we'll quickly try to discuss the uh, content part for this question that I had given you in the previous topic. So basically, they're asking us justice should not only be done but manifestly seen to be done. So here, the two important concepts related to justice needs to be discussed. That is substantive justice. So substantive justice is about fairness and righteousness of decision itself. So what is the ultimate decision? This decision is correct or wrong, whether it is based on fair analysis or unfair analysis. So this decision will be the point of uh, argument here. So it is important that justice is not only delivered according to the law, but also the end judgment, it is moral and ethical in the principles way. So without transparency, let's say this particular decision, even if it is let's say whole process went on transparently, but at the end the decision is not based on ethical grounds, the justice may not be served. So the ultimate decision needs to be based on moral principles is the idea here. The second one is the topic of procedural justice. So what is procedural justice? It is about the process altogether. Let's say it talks about the fair trial. It talks about the public prosecutor representing the victim in a proper way. It talks about timely hearing, unbiased judiciary giving the judgment. So this basically talks about the procedure. So even if the ultimate judgment is coming from a Supreme Court or any other court, if the process is not proper, or if the process is not even in a just manner, even if the decision is correct, many people feel that it undermines the credibility of the legal system. So at the same time, if both the above are not maintained in a proper way, it has a major impact on trust of the people or what they perceive about the public system. So it's a critical factor which establishes the legitimacy of democracy. So justice is, even if the justice is not seen to be done and assures that public, is assured that yes, this person has got the justice, if we don't follow the process in that manner, probably the justice is not served. So the whole process you can explain with the concept of Nirbhaya case, where in a very quick manner government has set up the special courts to deal with the culprits, and within record short time they were convicted and even the punishment was imposed. So while the judgment was just, that is the decision was a just one, the public perception of justice was strengthened by the idea of transparent judicial proceedings. So what happened in the courts were discussed in the newspapers very well, and the public debates on it, the media coverage on it, it all gave a perception to the people that yes, the victim has got justice because the procedure has been followed and the ultimate decision is also correct. So keep writing answers in your in the comment section and also in your notes, and we'll discuss every question in a class so that you can improve your answer writing based on newspapers. Stay tuned for the next video. Thank you so much.